Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is what if Naruto was the blonde-eyed Akatsuki member hiding in the Hokage's library? Part 2. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic. Naruto gleefully slurped up her ramen. She set down the bowl and burped. Thanks, Sasuke. Sasuke smiled faintly. Will you be coming by tomorrow? He asked. The blonde scrunched up her face, thinking. Let's see. Today's the 5th night I'm here, so, nope. I won't be here tomorrow night. Tonight's my last in a while. Sasuke's spirits dropped at that statement. He had been in unusually good spirits these past few days. It had even shown on his face and in his general manner. The staff at the Hokage Tower had been giving him curious looks when they thought he wasn't looking, and Sakura had asked him point-blank during their ramen lunch yesterday. He had given her one of his looks, and she had dropped the topic. But now the reason for he didn't quite know what to call the emotion he was feeling. He wasn't exactly happy, but perhaps it was a faint happiness. Anyways, the reason for his good mood had just told him she wouldn't be dropping by for who knew how long more. She had appeared the previous 4 nights in succession after almost 6 weeks of absence, and ate his ramen every night, and spent the night in his bed, too. Unfortunately, in inner Sasuke's opinion, he wasn't in the same bed at the same time. He was getting an ache in his back and dark circles under his eyes from sitting on the floor at night and watching her sleep until his eyelids drooped on their own accord. But it was worth it, to have her near. Naruto continued, oblivious to Sasuke's thoughts. I've got a sort of mission coming up with Itachi Nissen and Kisame in 2 days' time, so, yeah, tomorrow night's my last for a while. I don't know how long it'll be before I can raid your kitchen cupboards again. She burped and stretched, not noticing Sasuke's eyes narrowing at a certain phrase she'd used, then following her movements and resting on her smiling face. I don't know how I survived without coming here for ramen at night. Just a few days in a row and I'm so comfortable with it. Definitely gonna miss this during the mission. She smiled wistfully, then turned to look straight at Sasuke, whose heart gave an extra strong thump. She grinned at him, and his heart skipped a few beats. I definitely owe you, Sasuke, she declared. Sasuke took a moment to ponder. The Naruto he knew years ago would have rather bitten off his own arm before saying something like that. Then a devious idea popped into his head, one that made his heart race just thinking about what would happen if she said yes. Yes, you owe me, he told her. He was sure his eyes must have glinted evilly or something, but she was happily rocking on the back 2 legs of the chair and wasn't really paying attention to him. She replied absently, and ran a hand through her hair. Sasuke smirked. He hadn't smirked in a long time. She was still balancing the chair on 2 legs and apparently thinking of something. He decided to unveil his evil plan. Since you owe me, I know of a way you can repay me. Go on a date with me. Sir Nani. She had begun to reply automatically when what he was asking sank into her head, and she stared at him in shock before losing balance and crashing to the floor in a loud clatter. Sasuke couldn't help it. He laughed lightly at the sight of her shocked face goggling at him from the pile of limbs and chair on the floor. He quickly got up, pulled the chair away from her and set it on its feet, smirking. He kept the smirk on his face but his stomach was invaded by nervous butterflies as he slowly reached down, gently grabbed her upper arm and pulled her upright. He could feel she was very tense under his grasp, and was trembling lightly. Her eyes were squeezed shut and her lips were set in a thin, straight line, and her face had a look of intense concentration, like she was trying to figure out the solution to a difficult and unpleasant problem. The brunette reluctantly let go of her arm. Are you all right? He asked. It came out softer than he had intended, but he didn't care. She took a deep breath before replying. I'll be fine, she answered, as softly as he had spoken. Silence fell upon the house, broken only by the sound of Naruto's breathing, which slowly went back to normal as Sasuke watched her intently. Sasuke smiled gently as she slowly opened her eyes and turned to him, and he heard her breath hitch when she focused on him. They stared at each other for what seemed like a single moment, yet stretched a whole eternity. Naruto was the first to break the unusual silence. She turned away and smoothed down her cloak and ran her fingers through her hair. The moment over, Sasuke sat down in his chair again, and waited as the blonde plopped into her chair that he'd straightened earlier. How do you expect me to go out with you? A missing nin on a date with the Rokudime Hokage? She asked him, grinning lopsidedly. Sasuke's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't turned him down. He took it as a good sign. A very good sign. Simple, he answered, smirking a little. Henge isn't an option since we have the Hyuga in Konoha. So, hair dye, makeup and contact lenses. Naruto pursed her lips contemplatively, and Sasuke fought the urge to lean over and kiss those lips. He forced his eyes away from her red lips to her eyes. You're crazy, was her conclusion. Sasuke chuckled lightly. He felt light-hearted, knowing she wasn't turning him down. You've rubbed off on me, he replied. She scowled. I don't have anything to wear, unless you don't mind me wearing this Akatsuki cloak. Her eyes gleamed mischievously. Sasuke smirked, and Naruto moved back a little at the sight of it. It was a, "You're not getting off that easily," smirk. I have some dresses, he began. Naruto choked on spit. You kinky bastard. Her mouth opened and closed a few times, and her cheeks turned red. Man, I can just imagine you in a dress. Her eyes were wide and unfocused. A small blush spread across her face, the mental image presumably playing in her mind. Sasuke flushed. No, baka. An eyebrow twitched, as did a fist. Naruto came back to earth and winked suggestively at him, grinning widely. Hey, I don't mind your kinkiness. Heck, I'd kill to see you in a dress. Sasuke's eyes widened and his jaw hung loose for a few seconds as a fierce blush crept onto his cheeks. Naruto laughed hysterically and slapped him on the back. He was immediately broken from the spell at her action, and quickly turned to her. She had stopped laughing and was looking thoughtfully at her left hand, the one that had touched him so casually, so naturally. Sasuke noted with a sense of gladness that she wasn't trembling or shaking. She closed her eyes for a second, then turned to him, grinning. The laughter was back in her eyes, and it was such a contrast to the blank eyes Sasuke remembered seeing the first few times she reappeared in Konoha. Seriously, I wouldn't mind you getting kinky, she said slyly. Sasuke smirked, his composure regained. Only if you get kinky together with me, he answered in a husky voice. Her eyes widened a little and her breath hitched. Cerulean Blue stared into deep onyx, but neither managed to get deep, since both were so guarded. Naruto looked away first. You kinky bastard, she repeated a little shakily. Sasuke forced his pounding heart to slow down. The blonde shook herself and grinned. Sasuke smiled faintly. So, kinky Sasuke, you were saying. Sasuke's eyes narrowed slyly and a little evil grin curved his lips. Naruto raised an eyebrow. As I was saying before your perverted self interrupted, he replied, I have some dresses, laid as kimono, actually. They used to belong to my Okasan. Naruto blanched a little. Ah, sorry, I wouldn't have made fun of you if I had known they were your Okasans. Sasuke waved it away. It was nothing. Don't worry, he smirked. Back to business. I can provide the kimono, the hair dye, the makeup and the contacts. Any other questions? Naruto's face scrunched up adorably, doing funny things to Sasuke's insides and making his smirk loosen into a fond smile. How are you gonna get the other stuff? She asked, putting her elbows on the table so her palms could cradle her cheeks. pushing them so that they looked squished against her face. "You don't have to worry about that. Now," he said, "can you be here during the Sakura season? Konoha is having the annual Sakura festival, which Tsunade and I are to officiate." His voice and expression turned a little hesitant, and a faint pink dusted his cheeks. His gaze lowered from her face to bashfully focus on the table as he fought his sudden nervousness. "I was hoping you could accompany me. That is, I hope you could be my date to the festival." His blush rose with each stutter and the continued silence from Naruto. When he finally gathered enough courage to look at her face, he saw she was smirking mischievously. "You do a pretty mean impression of Hinata, Sasuke," she exclaimed, and broke into a wide grin. All bashfulness fled from him, and Sasuke scowled and turned away. A small feeling of hurt rose in him when he realized that Naruto wasn't taking him seriously. But her next sentence chased the thoughts and hurt away. "I'd love to go on a date with you, Sasuke." The sincerity in her voice was unmistakable. Sasuke's eyes quickly rested on her face, and at the sight of her warm, gentle smile, his heart thudded against his chest and he felt like he was somewhere in between the heavens and earth, frozen in time. He finally managed. "Thank you, Naruto." The blonde blinked very slowly. "The pleasure is mine," she answered softly. Sasuke's heart seemed to have expanded and was now trying to burst out of his ribcage. A silly, goofy grin stretched his lips before he managed to tone it down into a small smile. He definitely couldn't wait for their date. He told her the date of the festival's opening day. "Can you make it?" he asked a little anxiously. "You'll need to be here one day earlier so you can dye your hair." I understand if you can't. Please be able to come. Please be able to make it." Inner Sasuke cried, pulling on his bangs anxiously. Naruto rubbed her chin thoughtfully. No promises," she replied slowly, "but I think I should be able to be here." Inner Sasuke bounced off mental walls. Sasuke felt relief wash over him, and nervousness in anticipation of their date began to set in. He couldn't help smiling at her, and worked hard to resist the urge to put his arms around her and pull her close. Naruto smiled back, then cracked a large yawn and blinked back a few yawn-induced tears. She rubbed her yes, then ran a hand through her hair and scratched her scalp lazily. "I think it's gotten pretty late. I have to get going early tomorrow, so," she paused uncertainly and looked at Sasuke hesitantly. The brunette almost rolled his eyes at her. She'd been sleeping in his bed for the past 4 nights and every night that she'd dropped by previously, and each time she dared not impose herself on him. "You're welcome in my bed anytime," he said without thinking, then tried to force back a blush when Naruto raised an eyebrow and grinned. "You pervert. Kinky pervert bastard." She wiggled her eyebrows suggestively at him. Sasuke's heart was racing, but he managed to smirk in what he hoped was a sexy manner. "Only if you get kinky and perverted with me, remember," he said huskily, and watched in satisfaction as she swallowed when her eyes met his. He stood up and walked to his bedroom after turning off the kitchen lights. He heard her chair scrape back and her barely audible footsteps following him. As had become usual for the past 4 nights, he entered the bedroom first, held the door open for her, then closed it and sealed the room after she entered. He turned around to settle in his usual position, but noticed with faint curiosity that instead of lying down near the edge of his king-sized bed like she always did, this time she lay on her side near the further edge of the bed. She avoided his eyes. "I feel bad for making you sit on the floor all the time while I use your bed," she said quietly. "Why don't you, come and lean against the edge of the bed, at the very least?" She stretched her hand and patted the edge of the mattress she usually lay on. Sasuke's pulse started accelerating as he slowly walked the short distance and sat down so that his side leaned against the bed. He cradled his head with his arms so that they were resting on the mattress in such a way that he could watch her unobtrusively. He didn't say anything, but kept his eyes on her the whole time, and noticed how she was following his movements. Very slowly and hesitantly, the hand nearest to him reached out and gently stroked his cheek. Her hand was shaking lightly, but her eyes were guarded. Sasuke closed his eyes and leaned into her touch, and immediately missed the warmth when her hand returned to her side. His skin tingled where she had touched, and he forced himself to remember the sensation of her skin against his. She fell asleep not too long after that, and Sasuke watched her until he too drifted off to sleep. Sasuke sat in his usual chair in his kitchen, resisting the urge to get up and pace. Instead, his fingers tapped out an impatient rhythm on the wooden table. Naruto was late. All right. Fine, she wasn't late, per se. She was usually already in his apartment and into his ramen by the time he got home, but tonight she hadn't appeared yet, and Sasuke was a little worried. Who knew what could have happened during the past weeks? Practically every hidden village had declared Akatsuki their enemy, and almost all the villages had kill-on-sight orders issued, secondary only to run-for-your-life orders. Speaking of other hidden villages, Sasuke was reminded of Sunagaku. He remembered how Gaara almost killed him the first time the Kazekage came to Konoha and found out that Naruto had disappeared. He had constantly demanded updates of the situation, and had even sent out some Suna search parties, but to no avail. Then, about 3 years ago, he had abruptly stopped questioning Konoha about Naruto. Had he known about Naruto? If so, did she make him keep the secret? It began to rain even more heavily outside, but Sasuke didn't pay attention. Tomorrow was the opening ceremony of Konohagakure's annual Sakura festival. Tsunade had grudgingly reminded him about their joint responsibility to officiate the ceremony tomorrow. Sasuke was just relieved that it was mainly just a formality, and that he did not have to make fancy speeches about how he loved the village and other such nonsense. Suddenly, a spike in chakra signaled the apparition of a cloaked figure into the room. The cloaked figure quickly hinged into an empty instant ramen cup that clattered to the floor. Sasuke would have raised an eyebrow, but he felt the incoming chakra signatures, and soon there were a series of smart knocks on his kitchen window. He scowled lightly and got up to open the window. On the way, he kicked the ramen cup out of sight under the table. What? He barked at the two Anbu crouching on the wall in such a way that they could peer into the window. My apologies, Rokudime-sama, but an Akatsuki member was spotted in Sector 11 of the village. Anbu-8 is in active pursuit. Sasuke didn't have to feign his displeasure at their incompetence. His scowl deepened. How many times has this happened? Your superiors will have to answer to me for your incompetence after the festival. Apprehend the criminal, or be demoted to Chunin. He slammed the window shut in their faces, and scowled at the puddle on the floor under the window, and at his own damp standard-issue turtleneck front. He wiped some water from his face and cast a privacy seal onto his apartment. A poof sounded, then a thunk, as Naruto bumped her head on the underside of his table. OWW, she grumbled, and crawled out rubbing her head. You didn't have to kick that hard, bastard. Sasuke felt so relieved to see her unharmed, though soaking wet. But he scowled at her. You're late. She scowled back. I ran into some problems, as you know. You conveniently forgot to mention the increased security. I had to lead them away from your place or people would be wondering what the Rokudime Hokage was doing letting an Akatsuki member into his house in the middle of the night. Sasuke smiled faintly at that, and really wanted to hug her close, to feel her pressed against him, and to let her know how worried he was. His concern for her alarmed him to some degree. It was at such odds with his usual cold self, but at the same time it felt natural, and welcome, even. He closed his eyes and sighed. Kage Bunshin, he said instead, referring to whatever the Anbu were chasing in Sector 11. She grinned impishly. Oh yeah. He sighed fondly and walked out of the kitchen, beckoning her to follow. He heard her hiss slightly, as if in pain, and turned around in concern. Naruto had a hand pressed to her side and was grimacing. She looked up to see Sasuke looking at her, and waved the other arm at him dismissively. It's nothing. Just a slight cut I got during a mission, she said. Sasuke rolled his eyes and shot her an exasperated look. 20 years old and you still can't protect yourself. Looks like you need me around to protect you, Dobi, he drawled rather condescendingly. Naruto scowled darkly at him. As arrogant as ever. I don't need your help, she told him angrily, and moved her eyes away from his face. She stomped past him into his bedroom and sat heavily on the bed, crossing her arms across her chest and scowling. She didn't switch on the light, so Sasuke did as he entered. She blinked at the sudden brightness and turned to stare at the floor to his left. Sasuke sighed softly. He hadn't really meant to insult her, it just came naturally. If you come back to Konoha, you wouldn't have to get hurt all the time, he said softly as he stood in front of her. She didn't turn to him, but her scowl became darker and she fisted her hands tightly. I'm a ninja. Getting hurt is part of the job description, she told him through gritted teeth. Her fists tightened. And I've told you before, I'm not coming back to Konoha. Sasuke's eyebrows creased as he frowned. He crouched down. Why not? He demanded quietly. You've never told me. He could see her fists tighten even more until they started to shake. She took some deep breaths before replying. I have told you, I'm the bane of Konoha. Why would I want to come back? Not when I can live where people don't glare coldly at me for something I have no control over, and curse me behind my back. She abruptly turned to him. Her eyes were hidden by her bangs, but he could almost feel their intensity. Listen, Sasuke, I came here 'cause you asked me on a date, not to get the third degree from you. Can we drop this topic? Or else I'm leaving. Sasuke stiffened and frowned. Naruto looked away. The brunette clenched his fists a little angrily as silence descended on the room. He wanted to know her reasons for staying away. It seemed so hypocritical of her, wanting to be Hokage and forever trying to drag him back when they were younger, only now to stay away from the village, not wanting to come back. Yet at the same time, if there was one thing Uchiha Sasuke knew about Uzumaki Naruto, it was that the blonde was never a hypocrite, and Sasuke was very sure it wasn't any different for Namikaze Naruto. Unfortunately, she obviously didn't want to talk about it, and him pressing her about the issue would only drive her away. It was something he could not afford to do right now. He wanted her near so much. He thought of her and missed her and worried about her when during the days she was away, and wanted to have her by his side and protect her from Akatsuki and the blinded, close-minded people of Konoha. He wanted to help her overcome her haphiphobia, then hold her so close he could feel her heartbeat against his. His brows furrowed even more. He was aware of the fact that he obviously thought of her as more than a rival, an ex-teammate, or even a mere friend. The question was, did he want to let go of his inhibitions and let down his walls to allow the feelings to grow? More importantly, did she feel for him even the slightest of what he felt for her? He inhaled and exhaled deeply and slowly, and looked up to see Naruto peering curiously at him with only traces of her earlier scowl left on her face. He stood up and ran his fingers through his hair as he turned away from her. The stuff is in the bathroom in a paper bag. You can't miss it. I also included a special type of body lotion that will disguise your skin tone and scent. He indicated towards the bathroom. Okay, Naruto replied, then suddenly hissed in pain when she stood up. Sasuke whirled around in concern to see her bent over a little, gingerly pressing a hand to her side. It's nothing, she gritted out, then squeezed her eyes shut as another wave of pain seemed to overtake her. It's not nothing, Sasuke said a little snappishly, annoyed that he couldn't touch her to examine the wound. Naruto managed a glare in his direction before unbuttoning her cloak and letting it fall to the floor. Sasuke frowned deeply at the state of her clothes. They were bloodied and torn. What worried him the most, however, was the piece of metal he saw sticking out from her side. He slowly stepped nearer to her. "You called that nothing?" he asked, and glared at her. "How did you get that?" She glared at him again before contorting her face in pain. I got in the way of a kunai wrapped with an exploding note. 2 pieces got in when it exploded to bits. The other piece is out, and now the Kyuubi's chakra is pushing this one out so the wound can heal. Don't worry, it's about to come out already." Sasuke watched in morbid fascination with his Sharingan activated. He could see the orange-red chakra surrounding the metal in a wave-like pattern, pushing it out of Naruto's side. "I'll pull it out," he said. Naruto quickly shook her head. "No need, it's coming out," she rasped, taking a step back. Sasuke shook his head, his Sharingan spinning slowly. "It'll be faster if I pull it out," he insisted. He had almost added a "dobi" at the end of that sentence. "Trust me." Naruto stiffened at his last 2 words, and glanced up at him. She was frowning in pain, but otherwise she didn't move. Sasuke took it as permission, and stepped nearer to her. He could see her eyes were following his every move. Sasuke slowly lifted his hand and firmly gripped the piece of metal sticking out of her flesh. He could see her tense up even more. "You need to relax. This will probably hurt a little," he told her. 1, 2, and he peeled the kunai piece out smoothly. Naruto gave a small grunt of pain and closed her eyes. Sasuke put the bloodied metal piece onto his nightstand and flashed through some hand seals. A pale green sphere of chakra enveloped his hands, and he let his palms hover over the bleeding wound in Naruto's side. She started in surprise. "You know healing jutsu?" she asked. Sasuke grunted, feeling a little offended at her surprised tone. Sakura taught me. Now stay still and keep quiet or I might grow you a tumor." He didn't look up at her face, but she kept still. He watched the edges of her skin ease together and fuse under his palms, and let go when the process was complete. He exhaled and sat back on his haunches, and glanced up at the blonde, who was having an impressed look on her face. She reached down to poke at the newly closed wound. Sasuke quickly swatted her hand away, but not before she managed one poke. "Ow!" She quickly retracted her hand and moved a few steps back. "Don't touch it yet, Baka. You might reopen it," Sasuke scolded, and stood up to sit on the bed. He looked up to see her staring at him with an unreadable expression on her face. Her eyes were partially hidden by her blonde fringe. He stared back at her, trying to fathom what she was thinking, but after a while she shook herself and grinned. "The stuff's in the bathroom, nay. I'll get started, then." She left the room. Sasuke reached down to pick up her discarded Akatsuki cloak. It was thoroughly wet, and muddy in a few spots. He ran his fingers over the tear that corresponded to the wound he had just healed, and turned the cloak around to find another similar tear. Probably the entry site of the second piece of metal. He closed his eyes and grimaced for a moment, then stood and took a hanger out of his clothes cupboard and hung the cloak on one of the pegs standing in a row on the wall. That done, he walked out of his bedroom to the living room, seated himself on the couch and reached for a scroll he had left there when he had arrived home earlier. Usually he would have finished his work in the office, but today he had decided to take the scroll home with him to wait for Naruto. He left at the same time as his secretary, who had given him a strange look, since he had never left before or at the same time she did. He immersed himself in reading the scroll, only vaguely aware that Naruto was taking her own sweet time in the bathroom. After about an hour, he heard the bathroom door open, and looked up in anticipation. A few seconds later, a dark brown head poked itself into the room, followed by the rest of the body it was attached to. Sasuke looked over the disguised Naruto judgmentally. The dye he had given her turned her hair a rich mahogany brown, and the lotion he had provided covered up her tan quite well, leaving her with a skin tone almost as pale as his. Cheek pads made her formerly well-defined cheekbones more chubby. She had tried on the makeup and contacts, so her whisker marks were gone, and her eyes were now a nondescript chocolate brown. Altogether she didn't look particularly memorable or outstanding, or Naruto-ish, just the way he had planned it. With a tight feeling in his chest he realized he wanted the real blue-eyed blonde, not a fake brown-hued woman. He sighed softly and smiled gently at her. She was looking at him quizzically, dressed in one of his yukata that he had laid out for her. It was a little too big for her, but not by much, since he wasn't that much bigger than her. "I look really different," she remarked, pushing up the loose sleeves of the yukata as she rubbed her pale arms. The cheek pads in her mouth made her voice a little different. "That would be the whole point," he answered dryly. She replied by sticking out her tongue at him, and flinging herself into the chair beside his. He pushed back an absent-minded wish that she'd seated herself beside him on the sofa instead of in another chair, and picked up the scroll again. A soft growl interrupted his reading, and he looked up with a bemused face to see Naruto rubbing her stomach sheepishly. "Haha, haven't eaten since last night, since I was kinda in a hurry to get here," she informed him. He felt a prickle of warmth in his chest at what she said. She had actually hurried here, and didn't even stop to eat. He didn't know for sure if Naruto's eating habits had changed, and he didn't think they had, but he was pretty sure Naruto willingly skipping a meal was a big deal. The corners of his lips quirked up in a small smile and he casually jabbed a finger in the direction of his kitchen. "You know where the ramen is," he said, and his smile grew at the way her now brown eyes widened and her lips stretched into a pleased grin. She bounced off the chair and practically ran to the kitchen. "Love, I mean, you totally rock, Sasuke," she called back. Sasuke closed his eyes and breathed out as his fingers unconsciously tightened around the scroll. It was the second time she had almost let that word slip. Did she really mean it, or was it just a figure of speech? Then again, if it was just a figure of speech, she wouldn't stop herself from finishing the word, right? But if she meant to say what Sasuke hoped, inner Sasuke supplied, and got trashed for this troubles, why did she always cut herself off? Maybe she didn't really feel that way. After all, he did almost kill her when they were genin, and all but kicked her out of the village himself 5 years ago. The sounds of Naruto bustling back into the living room made him look up. She was carrying a tray he didn't know he had, and on the tray were at least 8 steaming cups of ramen. He gave her a fondly exasperated look, and she pouted at him. "What? I am hungry." To his mild surprise, she carefully handed him 1 cup, together with a pair of chopsticks. She shrugged in response to his quirked eyebrow. "Just thought you might be hungry too. If you aren't, it's fine, 'cause there's always room for more ramen in my stomach." Sasuke smiled, feeling touched that she'd actually prepared 1 cup for him. "Thanks." They quietly ate their ramen. Sasuke noticed that Naruto wasn't eating as messily and loudly as usual, and commented on it. The blonde half scowled, half pouted at him. "Meanie, you and Itachi-Nisan are so similar. He told me he'd stick me in Tsukiyomi if I didn't learn some manners and etiquette." Sasuke's expression and mood darkened at the mention of that man's name. He didn't like the fact that he was still alive, and that Naruto was hanging around him more than she was around Sasuke. The blonde merely examined him for a few moments with an expression Sasuke couldn't figure out, then yawned and stood up. "I'm dead tired," she said, and yawned again. She stretched, and Sasuke caught himself appreciating the way his yukata slid and tightened over her chest as her arms went upwards. "Let's go to bed, Sasuke," she yawned, and stood up to start walking toward his bedroom. Sasuke pointedly ignored the jolt his lower regions felt at her words, and rolled up the scroll neatly before getting up and heading to his bedroom, trying to stop his heart from pounding so hard. She was putting away the brown contact lenses when he entered. He waited for her to finish and sit on the bed before switching off the light and walking towards the bed, feeling just so warm and strangely content at how wonderfully normal these actions felt, as they were part of their nightly routine. His chest tightened with the longing for it to come true. He sat himself in a comfortable position and rested his head on the mattress, and smiled gently at her. She started to smile back, but ended up yawning instead. "What were you reading earlier, Sook?" she asked, blinking at him. He could barely make out the blue of her eyes. He didn't hesitate to answer. "Negotiations for an alliance from Tokigakure." Naruto thought for a while, then chuckled lightly. "Yeah, I remember that place with the weird water and that whiny guy. What are their terms?" She either didn't see that it wasn't exactly proper for the Rokudime Hokage to be discussing village affairs with a missing nin, an Akatsuki member, no less, in the bedroom, or just didn't care. It was the latter in Sasuke's case. They want an exchange of some jutsu, but their list of jutsu that we don't already know is too short. There is nothing we can gain from them in terms of trade, and they aren't willing to hand over any samples of their hero water. Tell them the most Konoha would do is to teach them basic medical jutsu, and maybe a couple of ninjutsu, and that we'd accept their list of jutsu. Intel concerning village security, like rumors of wars or the movement of common enemies, must be shared wholly and willingly. If they want more than that, then they might as well swear allegiance to Konoha and become a Konoha outpost, with their hero person a subordinate of the Hokages. The Rokudime was impressed, and let it show in his face, together with a raised eyebrow. She caught his expression and looked away. "I mean, those are the terms I'd state if I was if I had to decide." She yawned and curled up, bringing her knees halfway up to her chin and curling an arm over them. Sasuke sighed, and looked away as the feeling of guilt came back. "You'd make a better Hokage than me," he murmured. He couldn't quite keep the longing out of his voice as he spoke again. "If only you'd come back." He looked to the blonde to see that she had closed her eyes and her face was blank. "Please, let's not get into that again, Sook." Her voice was a little pleading. "And I've told you, stop feeling guilty about me leaving the village. It wasn't merely you could say that it was mostly because of Konoha." She exhaled, and a small smile curved her lips. "Oyasumi, Sook." Sasuke stared at her for a long moment before closing his eyes. "Oyasumi, Naruto." Sasuke stirred lightly as a faint ray of sunlight hit his face. He squeezed his eyes shut, then opened them, and was rewarded with the picture of a sweet face, whose eyes were closed in sleep. For a split second he tensed, then his sleep-clouded brain cleared enough for him to remember that it was Naruto. He felt his heart expand within his chest, and realized that he loved waking up beside her, although he would much prefer her natural blonde hair and tan skin. Her makeup that hid the whisker marks had rubbed off a little, onto his pillow, he noticed in annoyance, so that the marks were partially visible. He watched as her nose twitched, followed by her eyelids. Then she blearily opened her eyes, and Sasuke almost hungrily drank in the sight of her cerulean blue irises. She blinked as she focused on him, then she gave him a gentle, sweet smile, and he all but melted. It was official. He wanted it so much, to wake up next to her every morning. "Ohio," she whispered, and giggled softly. He smiled in the dim dawn sunlight. "Ohio," he whispered back. Very slowly, he reached out and cupped her cheek, and let his fingers trail over her skin as he drew his hand back. His gaze never left her eyes, and their smiles never left their faces, though Naruto did stiffen a little. "Don't I get a good morning kiss?" Sasuke whispered teasingly, enjoying the light pink that dusted her cheeks. His breath caught as she brought her hand to touch her lips slowly and deliberately, then slowly let that hand move over to his face and pressed the fingers she had kissed to his lightly trembling lips. Her eyes never left his. She was rewarded with a dazed smile as she pulled back her hand. "Thank you," he whispered, and she grinned mischievously at him. "Why are we whispering?" she whispered. Sasuke grinned lightly. "I don't know," he whispered back. She giggled girlishly, then turned to face the ceiling as she stretched luxuriously. Sasuke watched her movements appreciatively. He shook his head a little, then got up and stretched, and looked to the bed to find Naruto's eyes on him. "You go ahead and use the bathroom first," he told her. She nodded and hopped off the bed. Sasuke dropped gracefully into the bed and snuggled into the warmth she left behind. He scowled at the makeup-stained pillow, and pulled off the soiled cover so as to use the bare pillow. He buried his face in it, but knew that her scent wouldn't be there. The body lotion he gave her ensured that much. It erased her original scent and replaced it with a flowery, perfume-like one. About 10 minutes later, she re-entered the room clad in the same yukata, but looked fresher. He watched her put on makeup and style her hair into a simple bun, leaving the contacts for last, at his request. He wanted to see as much of those blue eyes as he could. Finally she turned to him. Her skin was pale, due to the lotion, and her eyelids had a pastel purple hue, thanks to the makeup he had provided. Her whisker marks were reconcealed, and her lips were a pastel pink that made him want to kiss her. "The kimono is in my cupboard," he said, lazily stretching out his leg and pointing with a toe to indicate the cupboard as he hugged the pillow to his chest. She nodded cheerfully, went over to the cupboard and opened it. Sasuke watched her eyes widen. "It's beautiful," she exclaimed softly, lifting out the kimono. It was dark purple, with pale purple and pink sakura flowers and petals, seemingly swept by a breeze to swirl around the kimono. Rising from the lower hem to knee were delicate bamboo shoots. The leaves were pastel green and the stems were pale brown. The obi was blue in color, a cerulean blue that matched the original color of her eyes. Sasuke swung his legs over the edge of the bed and sat up. "It was one of my mother's favorite kimono. I guess it's the one I liked best, too." He ran his fingers through his bangs and smiled gently at the way Naruto's expression softened. With a small, soft smile on her lips, she ran a hand over the delicate embroidery of the kimono's designs. It was one of the reasons Sasuke liked the kimono very much. The patterns of sakura and bamboo were actually embroidered on the material, and not mere prints. He vaguely remembered liking to run his hands over the silky cloth and feel the embroidery when he was young and his mother was still alive. He pushed himself off the bed and went to the bathroom to bathe and do his morning routine. In less than 10 minutes he exited the bathroom and entered his room to see Naruto fully dressed and seated demurely on his bed. She looked up shyly, and he saw that the contacts were in, and sighed inwardly. He sat next to her, but at a distance she'd be comfortable with. "Thank you for taking me on this date, Sasuke-san," Naruto said in a shy voice, not quite meeting his eyes. Her hands were folded gently in her lap. It was so unlike her that Sasuke shot her a deadpan look and raised an eyebrow. "What's up with you? Why are you so shy and formal all of a sudden?" The demure look disappeared and she looked half annoyed and half frustrated. She folded her arms across her chest and stuck her tongue out at him. "Che," she said, "I was just getting into character. I can't be my usual loud self, and I can't be the squealing, clinging girlfriend, so all that's left is the sweet, shy girl." She looked a little embarrassed and turned her eyes away from his. Sasuke blinked, then chuckled. He was a little amused and quite touched that she had thought quite a bit about their date. "I see. Not bad," he said, his lips curved in a smirk. "All right, now listen closely, this will be your cover story." He outlined the background he had made up for the person Naruto would be pretending to be, and told her to sneak out of Konoha and come back in through the gate. He would meet her there. They went into the kitchen, where he pulled out some pork buns from his fridge and handed two to her, keeping one for himself and eating it. You remember everything, because if you don't you might get discovered, and with stepped-up security you'd probably get caught before I can get you out safely, he started to say with a vaguely worried look, but she interrupted him, scowling and rolling her eyes. Yeah, I know, Sasuke, and I can handle it. I'm a good ninja. If I've come this far with the Akatsuki, I can definitely handle one day in Konoha with you. Sasuke didn't fully understand how coming this far with the Akatsuki equated her being able to handle herself, but he didn't press it. Instead, he nodded. Fine, you'd best get going now. It's almost an hour past dawn, and the civilians will be stirring soon. He really wanted to give her a quick hug and a kiss on the cheek, but settled for grabbing her hand and giving it a firm squeeze before letting go. He was relieved that she didn't start, or pull away, although she did tense. She grinned and nodded at him. Okay. See you in 3 hours, bastard. She disappeared in a puff of smoke. Be safe, Sasuke thought to her. XXXXXXXXXX. Sasuke strode elegantly down the streets of Konoha, heading towards the gates. He had met with various people in charge of various parts of the festival, inspected the stage and security for one last time, and was now on his way to get his date. He realized he was a little nervous, his palms were a little sweaty, his heart was going faster than normal, and butterflies had taken up residence in his stomach. None of it registered on his face, though. He made sure of that. It was his first date. Women had thrown themselves at him, hoping to snag the Rokudime, but he'd turned them flat. Even before Naruto made her reappearance, he hadn't been interested in any of the women, so much so that rumors had been going around about his, or lack thereof. And now here he was, excited and nervous about his date with a disguised missing nin, an Akatsuki member and man-turned-woman who was originally born a woman. Who happened to be the daughter of the most beloved former Hokage, the Yondaime, and his former teammate and rival best friend. Sasuke nodded to the people who bowed respectfully to him as he walked, and paid no attention to the fluttering eyelashes and simpering smiles. He took a deep breath as the huge gates came into view, and as he got nearer, he spotted the purple-clad figure waiting at the guardhouse, eyes cast demurely to the ground. It seemed the Chunin guards were trying to chat her up, and she kept shaking her head. With me, your friend doesn't seem to be showing up, one of the Chunin, a brown-haired man, said with a predatory grin as he moved to stand next to Naruto, who smoothly stepped away. The other Chunin, a black-haired one, leered at Naruto. A surge of anger flashed through Sasuke, and he quickened his strides to reach the guardhouse. The two Chunin had now their backs to him, and were so concentrated on talking to Naruto that they didn't sense his approach. He saw that Naruto did sense him, and she finally looked up. A faint pink colored her cheeks before she quickly looked down again, with a smile playing at the corners of her lips. Sasuke narrowed his eyes and cleared his throat. A bit of killing intent leaked out, and the moment they sensed it, the two Chunin guards whirled around in a hurry. Their hands shot to their kunai pouches, but they both snapped upright and bowed smartly when they saw who it was. The Rokudime folded his arms across his chest. "Why are you both not at your post?" he asked coldly, glaring at them. "We were just speaking to this lady, Uchiha-sama," the brown-haired one replied quickly. The Uchiha's expression became frosty, and more killing intent leaked out. The nerve of these two trying to snag his date. "I wasn't aware that it was part of your duties to talk to every visitor who entered the gates," he snapped in an icy tone. The two Chunin were staring at the ground nervously. Began one of them, but Naruto's voice cut in. She spoke in a voice that was almost a whisper. "Sasuke-san," was all she said. Sasuke made a conscious effort to let go of his anger, and turned to her. She smiled gently at him, and he returned the gesture. He noticed the shock of the two Chunin, and realized that it was probably the first time he had ever smiled, to the knowledge of the residents of Konoha. Hatsutori Kazuha. He greeted her warmly, using an alias he had cooked up. Welcome to my village, Konohagakure. I hope these imbeciles have not disturbed you in any way, he said, narrowing his eyes at the staring Chunin, who scrambled back to their post and stared from that safer distance. She lifted her eyes to glance at him shyly, then dropped her gaze back to the ground. I am honored that you would invite me, Sasuke-san. And these two gentlemen have been kindly keeping me company as I waited for you, she replied. Kindly keeping me company. Sasuke almost snorted, but instead he gestured for her to enter. She took small, feminine steps to his side, and they walked into Konoha together. When they were out of earshot of the Chunin, Naruto spoke softly from the corner of her mouth, and Sasuke happily leaned in to listen, inwardly enjoying all the disappointed and jealous looks Naruto was getting from the majority of the single females they passed. He knew they looked good together. He had purposely chosen a royal blue kimono with a more masculine, geometric pattern of pale pink and purple sakura decorating the hems of the sleeve, and had bamboo shoots below the knees nearly identical to those on Naruto's kimono. They were basically matching and complementing each other. What took you? I had to stand there and tolerate those two idiots. I so felt like giving them both a kick to the shins, Naruto whispered furiously, but kept her face a mask of politeness. Sasuke chuckled softly. Sorry, Kazuha-san. Last-minute things. Naruto made a petulant sound, then stayed quiet and started to look at their surroundings as they made their way to the village center, where the opening ceremony would be held. A large crowd had gathered in front of the stage. As they approached the crowd, two Anbu suddenly materialized in front of Sasuke and dropped to one knee respectfully. Beside him, Naruto gave a short squeal and stumbled back a few steps. Sasuke quickly turned to her in alarm and saw the look of fright on her face. He shot to her side. Are you all right, Kazuha-san? He murmured in concern. I'm all right, Sasuke-san. Your ninja just startled me, that's all, she answered in a breathless voice that Sasuke knew right away she was faking. He mentally grinned at her quick thinking. Hatsutori Kazuha had never met Anbu before, and would definitely have been startled, at the very least, by the sudden appearance of the two shinobi. Uchiha-sama, one of them intoned, Godime-sama requests your presence at the stage, as the ceremony will begin in 10 minutes. Sasuke nodded curtly at the Anbu, who rose to their feet, bowed, and disappeared. He turned to Naruto. Good thinking, he whispered with a small grin, then continued in a louder voice, I have to go, Kazuha-san. Will you be all right on your own? He was truly concerned about leaving her alone. Kazuha's face smiled gently, but Sasuke could see her eyes harden. She replied, thank you for your concern, Sasuke-san, but I'm sure I'll be fine. Then she leaned near to him and whispered, and if you ever insinuate that I'm not able to take care of myself again, I'll personally ensure that you won't be continuing the Uchiha line, bastard. She straightened, gave him a sweet smile that completely contradicted yet emphasized what she had just said, and demurely looked to the ground. Sasuke scowled. He was concerned about her, that baka. But it was such a Naruto-ish response that his scowl turned into a faint smile, and he actually chuckled softly. Naruto glanced at him curiously, but he just shook his head, then nodded to her and left for the stage. Who's that girl? Tsunade asked point blank once he had reached her side. Sasuke's expression became frigid. I wasn't aware that part of the Hokage's duties were to spy on their subordinates' personal lives, he answered icily as he started up the stage behind her. Tsunade wasn't intimidated. Get the stick out of your Uchiha. The Uchiha clan is the responsibility of Konoha. As such, Whoever you choose to revive your clan with is my business as well. Sasuke glared angrily at her. Hatsutori Kazuha, he bit out. You recall my final mission before my appointment as Rokudime. As noted in my report, I rested overnight at Akagusa to recover from mild chakra exhaustion. I met her there. The circumstances were real, only Hatsutori Kazuha was not. But Tsunade probably wouldn't cry. I see, Tsunade murmured. Strange how you are so friendly with someone you met for such a short while, yet you ignore the hundreds of Konoha women practically falling at your feet. Single quote. Sasuke bristled. He hadn't expected Tsunade to be this inquisitive, though he was positive Sakura would drill him later. She helped clean my wounds and took care of me while I was there. I invited her here as a way to repay her kindness, he replied curtly. Thankfully, they were already on the stage, and two kunoichi on duty were showing them to the seats of honor. Tsunade made one last remark, quietly. I don't know why, but she reminds me of Naruto. The brunette nearly froze at that, and managed to keep calm with an effort. He feigned an offended and angry tone instead. Kazuha-san is nothing like that brash, loud, unpredictable Yujiro Tonkachi. Please do not make the mistake of confusing Kazuha-san for that idiot. Tsunade merely looked at him with an unreadable expression, then looked ahead to the crowds and sighed slowly. Sasuke turned his attention to the ceremony, which had started while the two Hokage were talking. Soon it was Tsunade's turn to make a speech, followed by Sasuke. He stepped up to the podium and flawlessly delivered his memorized speech in his usual emotionless way. His eyes, however, roamed the mass of people until they settled on Naruto's disguised figure standing at the fringe of the crowd. At the end of his speech, Tsunade came forward to stand beside him, and focusing their chakra, called out, Kai. In unison, all around Konoha, and around the square they were in, sakura trees that were previously bare and ugly burst into color and life as pale pink sakura blossoms sprouted on the branches, and sakura petals swirled in the air, reminding Sasuke of the pattern embroidered on the kimono Naruto was wearing. He searched the crow again and spotted her. She was watching the sakura petals twirl about her with a peaceful expression and a gentle smile that somehow had a tinge of sadness to it. She gracefully stretched out a hand and let a petal fall into it, then stared thoughtfully at the petal. The sad smile didn't leave her face. Sasuke ignored the rapturous cheers of the crowd and Shunshin-ed to her side. Kazuha-san, he called softly, so as not to startle her. Naruto turned her now brown eyes to him and the sadness left her face as she smiled at him. Sasuke-san, she answered. Out of the corners of his eyes, Sasuke saw quite a few men eyeing her, and a surge of possessiveness sparked in him. He was so tempted to snake an arm around her waist and keep her close to his side to show just everyone just whose date Hatsutori Kazuha was, and had to keep his twitching hands by his side. Shall we, Kazuha-san? He said, making a sweeping gesture with one hand. Naruto nodded shyly and kept to his side as they walked along Konoha, admiring the beautiful sakura trees. His male ego was satisfied by the jealous looks the single male fraction of the Konoha population shot him. He had meant for Hatsutori Kazuha to be an unremarkable, nondescript person, but somehow it didn't work. There was something about Naruto that attracted people to her, even when in disguise. Perhaps it was this something that Tsunade somehow recognized. Which reminded him. He slowly brought his head close to Naruto's and could see her tense almost imperceptibly. Tsunade knows about Hatsutori Kazuha, he whispered. She questioned me earlier, and I fed her our little story. To her credit, Naruto didn't show any negative reaction, but pretended to nod and smile shyly, as if in response to something Sasuke had said. How did she? She whispered back, then shook her head lightly. Must be that darned crystal ball of Sandaime Ojisan's. Sasuke agreed. We'll have to be more careful. But I want you to enjoy yourself, too. He felt foolish for saying such a sentimental thing, but was rewarded when Naruto lightly and quickly gripped his fingers with hers. Hey, Sasuke-kun, a familiar voice called out behind them. Sasuke scowled inwardly and turned around. Sakura, he said. The pink-haired chief medic was walking up to them hand in hand with her fiancé. Who's this? She asked with undisguised curiosity, and smiled cheerfully at Naruto. Hi, I'm Haruno Sakura, and this is Hyuga Neji, my fiancé. Hajime. She started to stretch out her hand, and Sasuke almost panicked until Naruto pretended not to see the hand and bowed respectfully. Hajime. My name is Hatsutori Kazuha, she said in Kazuha's shy, polite voice. Sakura smiled and let her hand fall, and bowed in return. Hajime, you're not from Konoha, are you, Hatsutori-san? Neji asked from Sakura's side. You are right, Hyuga-san. I am from Akagusa. Sasuke-san has done me the honor of inviting me to your lovely festival, which brings me here today. He'd better not turn on his Byakugan. Sasuke thought fervently. We were on our way to grab some lunch, Sakura informed Sasuke. Join us. We'd love to get to know Hatsutori-san better. Sasuke could easily read between the lines. You'd better come along cause I'm gonna give you and Hatsutori-san the third degree. He scowled at her. She grinned mischievously back at him, and Neji glared at him for scowling at Sakura. He ignored the Hyuga. We were thinking of Ichiraku ramen, she added, and inner Sasuke deflated like a punctured balloon. He had wanted to take Naruto there, since he knew she missed eating there. He had wanted to take her there by himself, just the two of them, but now it seemed that idea was out. He glared at Sakura, who shot him an amused look. She probably thought she was tempting him with Ichiraku ramen, since they had been having lunch there every once in a while since Naruto had disappeared years ago. He absently wondered when she had grown immune to his glares. Neji glared back on her behalf, and Sasuke ignored him, as usual. Fine, he said shortly, and turned to Naruto. He knew his expression softened when he looked at her. He couldn't help it. Shall we go for an early lunch, then, Kazuha-san? He asked gently. Naruto looked up at him. Her expression was polite, but he could see her eyes had brightened, and were practically shining. She nodded demurely. The four of them turned towards Ichiraku, and Sasuke felt Naruto give his hand a quick, excited squeeze, and nearly smiled at her hidden anticipation that was pretty obvious to him. Sakura had fallen in step beside Naruto, and was chattering away to the blonde-turned-brunette. Neji strode beside Sakura, and Sasuke could tell he was listening carefully to Naruto's shy replies even if his expression was blank. It was the nature of shinobi to be curious and alert, after all. They arrived at Ichiraku, and Sasuke knew Naruto was barely repressing a shit-eating grin by the way the corners of her lips twitched spasmodically. They ordered and ate, and Sasuke listened carefully as Naruto spontaneously told fictitious stories about Hatsutori Kazuha's fictitious life and childhood in Akagusa. He was grudgingly impressed at the way she came up with her stories and managed to keep track of them. Sasuke repressed a smile. Naruto somehow managed to eat her ramen in a ladylike manner, and when she was done, shot Sasuke a pleading look. He could immediately tell what she wanted. Inner Sasuke cackled evilly as Sasuke ordered another bowl of miso ramen. If he wasn't mistaken, miso was her favorite, and laced his fingers together as he waited for the food to arrive. Are you all right, Sasuke-kun? Came Sakura's voice. She sounded curious and a little concerned. He knew why. He had never ordered a second bowl of ramen before. I'm fine, Sakura. His reply was curt, as usual. He didn't turn to her, but he knew that she probably had on a thoughtful, calculative look. Good to know. I'll talk to you later, Sasuke-kun. Which, knowing Sakura, translated to, I'll be dropping by to interrogate you in the future." Sasuke scowled inwardly but kept his face blank as Sakura stood up to leave together with Neji. He heard her bid goodbye to Kazuha, to which Naruto shyly replied in kind. She walked over to clap him on the shoulder and was off. Beside him, Naruto released a loud breath. "That was stressful," she said softly, bringing up both hands to massage her temples. "I thought she'd figure me out any time. And if Neji had used his Byakugan, that would have been it." Her fingers pressed circles into her skin for a minute as she closed her eyes. "Man, I miss them," she whispered so softly Sasuke almost didn't catch it. It was on the tip of his tongue to tell her to stay in Konoha, but he refrained. It would only have upset her, and by extension, him, and turn the date, which was turning out to be quite enjoyable, bad. "Here you are. One miso ramen," Tsuki said jovially as he placed the steaming bowl in front of Sasuke. He saw Naruto perk up immediately and turn to him. He pretended to ignore her and reached for a new pair of chopsticks, breaking them apart. "Itadakimasu," he murmured, before calmly lifting out a few strands of the ramen and swallowing them. Inner Sasuke was grinning evilly. He turned and regarded Naruto nonchalantly as he chewed. "Sasuke," she whined softly, giving him puppy dog eyes. He merely raised an eyebrow as he repressed a smirk. "Ah, Sasuke," she whined again. This time he smirked as he caught up more noodles, raised them to his mouth and blew gently on them. Naruto made a disgruntled, pouting sound, and was turning away as Sasuke held out the noodles on the chopsticks to her. "Here," he said, smirking at her. Her eyes widened a little and she moved as if she wanted to cross her arms sulkily before she probably remembered that she was Hatsutori Kazuha, a shy and ladylike woman who didn't have temper tantrums in public. What could he say? He liked teasing her, and he found for some crazy reason he liked feeding her, too. Her expression softened as he continued feeding her, and soon a fond look settled on her face. A bit of broth splashed onto her cheek. Sasuke put down the chopsticks and slowly used his thumb to wipe it off. She had tensed, but only mildly. He brought his thumb back and licked the broth off it, and in that moment, he knew. He knew he cared deeply for her. He knew he wanted her by his side. He knew he wanted to keep her safe. He knew he'd kill for her. He wanted to feed her, and hold her close, and kiss her senseless. He was pretty sure he was in love with Namikaze Naruto. He was pretty sure he was in love with Namikaze Naruto. His tongue had frozen on the tip of his thumb while he had his little epiphany, so he retracted him and gave himself a little shake, and realized Naruto was staring at him with a strange expression, one he couldn't quite decipher. He raised an eyebrow at her calmly, though his heart was racing. She merely shook her head lightly, so he continued feeding her the little ramen left in the bowl. She kept a small smile on her face, though, and it only served to get Sasuke's heart thumping again. They finished up the ramen and Sasuke paid, and they left together. Naruto squeezed his hand again as they left, which he understood to be a gesture of thanks. They strolled along the streets of Konoha. Sasuke itched to hold Naruto by the waist, or at least by the hand, but held himself back, knowing that she wouldn't really appreciate it. He walked by her side quietly. It was strange to think that Naruto wasn't chattering his ear off, yet it was a comfortable silence. Many stared openly at him. Others did double takes when they realized that he was walking with a woman by his side. He led them towards a particular field where he knew the sakura were especially plentiful. Wow! Naruto breathed appreciatively once the field came into view. Sasuke smiled faintly and brought her to the far end of the field that was more secluded, and sat himself down in the grass. Naruto took a seat beside him. They sat silently, Naruto watching the blossoms on the tree and those swirling in the breeze, and Sasuke watching Naruto. She drew her knees to her chest and circled her arms around them as she rested her chin on her kneecaps. Her expression slowly became thoughtful, and a little sad smile curved her lips, Sasuke noted. He didn't like the look, but just continued to observe her. They were in the shade of a sakura tree that Sasuke was leaning against. Something struck him, and he quickly made a Kage Bunshin which disappeared with a Shunshin no Jutsu as soon as it appeared. Naruto turned to him and gave him a questioning look, to which he replied with a calm smirk. She wrinkled her nose playfully at him and went back to her thoughts, and he went back to his observations. He pushed himself downwards until he was lying on his side in the grass with one elbow propped up to support his head. Sasuke closed his eyes and inhaled deeply. The scent of the sakura was heavy in the air, the scent of spring. He felt a hand slowly and timidly comb its fingers through his hair, and allowed it for a few moments before slowly opening his eyes to look at Naruto. Her face and eyes were strangely blank, but when she realized he was looking at her, she gave him a quiet smile and one last brush of her fingers, then returned to staring at the sakura, though to Sasuke, her eyes were a little unfocused. They stayed like that for over an hour, not speaking, just enjoying each other's presence. For Sasuke, it was a real treasure to be able to spend time like this with Naruto. His heart grew heavy when he realized she might disappear again, and who knew how many months it would be before he got to see her again. He pushed the depressing thought out of his head, deciding to deal with that later. Sometimes other people would wander close to where they were, but they took off quickly once they realized it was Sasuke lying in the grass. The entire village knew how much he valued his privacy, and no one wanted to try his short patience. He had been counting on his reputation to keep the people away from this little corner of the field. A spike in chakra signaled the reappearance of his Kage Bunshin. The Kage Bunshin dropped something into Sasuke's waiting hand and dispelled itself. Naruto, who had been absently watching families and couples walk, laugh and play further away in the field with that blank look on her face again, turned to him when his Kage Bunshin reappeared. Sasuke sat up in the grass so that he was a little behind her. Very slowly, he took one end of the object his Kage Bunshin had given him into each hand and murmured, "Trust me." Naruto immediately tensed as he lowered the object around the front of her throat, but started to relax once she realized what it was. He fastened it and moved so that he was sitting by her feet, facing her. She picked up the pendant that was hanging off the fine white gold necklace and let it rest on her fingers as she brushed her thumb over its surface. Sasuke waited for a few seconds until the breeze picked up again, and blew the sakura towards them. He shot out a hand and caught a sakura blossom. Carefully, he plucked 2 petals from the flower and took the pendant from Naruto, careful not to touch her and cause her haphiphobia to flare up. "It's a locket," he explained, suddenly feeling bashful and embarrassed as he ran a finger over the heart-shaped ruby in the white gold heart before opening it. Instead of opening from the side, it opened down the middle to reveal that the ruby was actually fastened to the back of the locket. Inside the locket, he had Uchiha Sasuke engraved on one side, and on the other side, Namikaze Naruto. He carefully placed each folded petal before placing one each in each half of the pendant and closing it to form a heart again. He let it fall from his fingers to rest on her kimono, admiring the stark contrast of the ruby on the white gold heart, and the gleaming white on the dark purple fabric. "Just something to remind you of today," he said quietly, looking at her with what he was sure was a slight blush on his face. "It was a spur-of-the-moment thing, and this was the best I could find on such short notice." Quote, her face was oddly blank for a few seconds, and worry began to creep into Sasuke's heart, but then he realized her eyes were showing a maelstrom of emotions he couldn't start to distinguish her name. "Thank you," she finally said. Her voice was thick. She reached over and gripped Sasuke's hands between her own, and squeezed firmly for a long moment before letting go. "Thank you. XXXXXXXXXXX. The plan was for Hatsutori Kazuha to leave Konoha by about mid-afternoon, since she needed to get to the nearest village before dark, where she would spend the night before leaving for Akagusa in the morning. At least, that was the explanation that they had for Kazuha leaving so early. "Thank you, Sasuke-san, for a wonderful day," Kazuha said, bowing to Sasuke. He smiled softly at her. "It was my pleasure, Kazuha-san," he replied. "I wish you a safe journey. Do not hesitate to contact me if you are in need of anything." Kazuha bowed again, smiled, and turned to walk out of the village. Once she was out of sight, Sasuke turned to glare icily at the two Chunin on guard duty. They were a new pair, not the earlier two, and had been gawking at Sasuke and Kazuha. He turned on his heel and strode towards his apartment, only stopping to buy dinner for two at a nice restaurant. Once the food was ready and packed, he continued home. The moment he opened the door he could faintly sense her chakra signature, and to him it felt like he was really coming home. He closed the door behind him and set up the privacy seal, then called out, "Tadaima." Naruto bounced out of the kitchen with a grin on her face. All traces of Kazuha's personality were gone, and Sasuke was glad. "Okari," she answered happily. He saw she had a cup of instant ramen in one hand and a pair of chopsticks in another. She was still clad in the purple kimono, but her brown hair had been let down, and it fell past her shoulders. Her contacts were out, so her eyes were their original, brilliant blue again. The locket was still around her neck. "Tadaima," Sasuke whispered, liking the sound of the word and the implications it had. "I'm home." Naruto gave him another grin and went back into the kitchen. Sasuke followed, and placed his bag of food on the table. "Don't eat any more," he told her. "You'll spoil your appetite." A snort of disagreement and disbelief came from her, as if to say, "Me spoil dinner." Sasuke had to agree. Male or female, Naruto could really eat. He shot her an amused look. "Fine then. Get changed when you're done with that," he said. "The things you need to remove your disguise are in the same bag in the bathroom. I'm sure you've noticed." She nodded with her cheeks full of food and eyes squinted into upturned curves at him, and he smiled faintly. She finished her ramen quickly and drained the soup, then tossed the cup into the trash and headed for the bathroom. "Dinner will be ready by the time you're out," he called after her, and went to his bedroom to change into a short yukata that came to mid-thigh, and a pair of long pants. He remembered his father used to dress this way around the house. He adjusted the yukata and went back into the kitchen where he brought out a new tablecloth he had secretly bought a few days ago and spread it on his dining table. He also set two of the placemats that came with the tablecloth. Then he got out some china and silverware he had found when he had rummaged through his kitchen cabinets not too long ago. The apartment had been in move-in condition when it had been offered to him, but he had never bothered to check what he actually had in all the cupboards, cabinets and shelves. He set the china carefully, not too sure whether his arrangements were correct or not, but he had a feeling Naruto wouldn't know either, and thus wouldn't mind. Flashing through a set of hand seals, he created a kage bunshin that again disappeared using Shunshin no Jutsu after picking up a clear, cut glass bowl. Then he retrieved a pair of candlesticks he had bought when he obtained the tablecloth. The candlesticks came with beige candles that had sakura petals embedded in them. He set them on the table, unlit for now. The bag containing the food he had bought earlier was sitting on a chair where he'd put it when he wanted to spread the tablecloth, so he picked up the boxes of food and stuck them in his microwave oven after checking that the boxes were microwavable. The kage bunshin reappeared with the bowl and dispelled itself just as the microwave dinged. Sasuke emptied the bowl carefully, then filled it with water till it was half full, then carefully placed the sakura blossoms his kage bunshin had brought back onto the water so that they floated. He set the bowl between the candlesticks, then took the hot food from the microwave and paused. He glanced at the different dishes and bowls, shrugged, and ladles out the food into whichever piece of china struck his fancy. Once he was done, he stashed the takeaway boxes and bag in a random cupboard, and washed his hands and face. As he dried his hands and face on a clean towel, he heard Naruto exit the bathroom, and then came the sound of his room door closing. He quickly formed some hand seals, and with precise chakra control, blew out a small, narrow flame to light the candles. Just as he let go of the chakra he'd molded to end the jutsu, footsteps sounded and paused at the kitchen door. "Talk about handy jutsu," Naruto said, grinning in amusement. She was dressed in her usual mesh t-shirt, orange tank top and black shinobi pants. The necklace he had given her earlier hung around her neck, and the white gold pendant with its ruby heart sparkled in the candlelight. Her other necklace that had an unusual blue-green stone, Sasuke remembered, was tucked into the orange tank top. As he observed her, Naruto's eyes widened, and she looked touched as she took in the fruit of his efforts. Her grin mellowed into a sweet smile. "Sasuke," she murmured as she approached the table. The corners of his lips curved upwards and his eyes an expression softened. He went around the table and pulled out a chair for her, and bowed her into the chair, twirling his hand in an exaggeratedly courteous manner. She giggled as he pushed the chair in, and he smiled. "Give me a moment," he murmured, and hurriedly set about making tea. He filled a kettle with water and set it on the stove, then dug around for a set of teacups and a teapot, rinsed them, placed a teacup each at Naruto's place and his own, then put a tea bag into the teapot. The water was taking too long to boil, so he quickly used a scaled-down Kaiden jutsu to boil the water. He heard Naruto laugh softly behind him at that. He whipped the kettle off the stove, poured the water into the teapot and put the teapot on the dining table before finally sitting down and grinning a little bashfully at Naruto, who answered with a small smile of her own. As they ate, they chatted and even laughed. Sasuke was a little surprised at himself about Team 7 Days and the people they knew. Akatsuki, Naruto's return to Konoha and other such melancholic topics were mutually avoided by them. Sasuke loved watching Naruto smile and laugh. He loved the way the candlelight flickered and caused Naruto's hair to shine and look like spun gold. He loved the way her eyes twinkled mischievously at times and turned into little crescents when she smiled or grinned extra wide, and most of all he loved how uniquely blue they were. But then again, he was sure he wouldn't care if her eyes were any other color, so long as they were Namikaze Naruto's eyes, and they were looking at him, because he was helplessly in love with Namikaze Naruto. Sasuke exited the Hokage tower and shoved his hands into his pockets, and looked up at the sky. The stars were blinking and the air was cool. With a deep breath, he started to walk home. It was quite dark, so he allowed a small smile to creep onto his face as he thought of her. He had enjoyed dinner with her very much. He loved watching her smile and laugh and talk to him across the table. His house didn't feel so lonely when she was around, it felt more like a home. He had wanted to tell her how he felt about her, but she had had to rush off right after dinner, and the words got stuck in his throat, and a slight blush got stuck on his face. She had raised an eyebrow, looking curiously at him, embarrassing himself trying to get the words out, but then a fierce blush colored her cheeks, and quick as a flash, she leaned towards him, gave him a kiss on the cheek, and disappeared before he could recover from his shock. His eyes had gone wide and a goofy smile had stretched his lips. His hand had covered his cheek where he'd been kissed, and he had stood rooted to the spot for a solid minute, grinning at nothing like an idiot. He was pretty sure he had been grinning in his sleep, too. As he relieved the memory while walking home in the dark of night, his hand strayed to the spot where she'd kissed him, and he grinned. His good mood had persisted for almost 2 weeks, and even now, a month and a half after she'd kissed him and disappeared, he realized he was still a little high on being in love. He had been in such unusually good spirits that at first, almost everyone he came across stopped and stared at him in curious amazement. It must have been some aura he had been emitting, because although he was being a little nicer than he usually was, he still wasn't exactly smiling at anyone, yet people seemed to have lost some of the fear they'd had of him. Sakura had cornered him after 1 week, dragged him to Ichiraku's for lunch and asked him point-blank whether he'd gotten laid. He had been thinking of Naruto when she'd suddenly asked him that, and he had nearly choked on the noodles he'd been eating. When he'd recovered, he had given her the fiercest glare he had in his arsenal. She had dropped the topic, but he still caught her staring at him with a assessing look every now and then. Even Tsunade was giving him strange looks in the office. He wondered what their reactions would be if they were to learn that it was because Uchiha Sasuke had fallen head over heels in love with Namikaze Naruto. Sasuke sighed as he approached his apartment block. He missed her badly, and what really worried him was how he was going to persuade her to stay in Konoha. He had given the issue much thought, but what he couldn't quite figure out was why she joined the Akatsuki and didn't want to come back. What had made her give up her dream of becoming Hokage? Uzumaki Naruto had been the #1 unpredictable ninja, and Namikaze Naruto, it seemed, wasn't any different in that respect. As Sasuke opened his apartment's front door, his heart gave a leap, then started racing. He sensed that wonderfully familiar chakra. An eager smile lifted the corners of his lips and he quickly entered, kicking off his shoes and shut the door behind him before casting a privacy seal. She was comfortably slouched in his armchair, facing away from the door. Sasuke quickly strode around the chair to face her. "Naruto," he started to say, but trailed off as he noticed her face. Her eyes were cold and hard, and her expression blank. It made his stomach twist uncomfortably and reminded him of the first time he'd caught her, in the Hokage's library. All the cheerfulness and mischievousness seemed to be gone, wiped off her face, and the life and sparkle in her eyes had hardened to the guarded, unemotional state he remembered seeing that first time they had interrogated her. Worried, he crouched down by her side and looked up at her. He squeezed her arm gently and briefly, and felt her flinch. "Naruto, is something wrong? Did something happen?" he asked concernedly. She ran a hand through her bangs and smiled at him. It was an empty smile that left him feeling more uneasy than reassured. "Nothing. Nothing at all," she replied in a faux cheerful voice. Sasuke stared at her for a moment, but she just plastered in that hollow smile onto her face. He thought about what he had been wanting to tell her and felt apprehensive, more so, now that she was acting so strangely. He swallowed and steeled himself. "Naruto," he said slowly, looking her in the eye. He wanted to hold her hand, but felt that she wouldn't tolerate it. "I have something to say to you." He took a deep breath, but she just looked at him with a bored expression. "I'm in love with you," he said clearly. "I love you, Naruto." Her eyes widened and she brought a hand to touch her throat that was covered by the cloak. Her jaw went slack, then it opened and closed a few times, like she didn't know what to say. Perhaps she was overcome by her emotions. Sasuke took heart. "You, in love with me?" she asked breathlessly, and Sasuke smiled with relief and nodded. Then her eyes hardened and her lips twisted into a mocking sneer, and she laughed coldly. The sound sent an unpleasant tingle down Sasuke's spine. He stared at her apprehensively. "Naru." Her eyes flashed with cruel amusement as she cut him off. "Yar yar. Who would have thought? Uchiha Sasuke is in love with the idiot, the hated of Konoha, the monster." She snorted and sneered at him. Her eyes were an icy blue. Nervousness and worry clawed at Sasuke's innards. "Naruto. What? This isn't like you at all." Naruto chuckled darkly at that. "Not like me at all," she repeated sarcastically. "Do you really know me, Uchiha Sasuke?" She spat. Sasuke was really taken aback, and stared at her, frozen to the spot. She laughed again, an unpleasant sound that grated on Sasuke's ears, so unlike the laugh he was used to. She leaned down and brought her face close to his, so close he could feel her warm breath across his skin. Her finger pushed up his chin so that he was looking at her directly in the eyes. Her lips curved into a cruel, mocking smile. "Who would have thought?" she said again. "Who would have thought that all it took for Uchiha Sasuke to fall in love was one kiss on the cheek?" The fingertips of her other hand caressed the pot where she'd kissed him in a mockingly tender way. "What if I were to kiss you on the other cheek as well? Would you do everything I command? And if I were to kiss you on the lips?" Her thumb gently massaged his lips, and she tilted her head so close that they were almost kissing. Sasuke's heart started pounding in spite of himself. "Would you follow me to the ends of the earth?" Her icy blue gaze bore into his eyes, and for a moment he froze. Then, giving himself a mental slap, he narrowed his eyes and slapped her hand away. She pulled her hand back to her chest with a look of exaggerated hurt, then laughed. Sasuke stood up and glared at her. "I don't know what you're trying to do, Naruto. This isn't the Naruto I know." He stood in front of her, put his hands on the armrests of the chair and leaned down. "Stop it, Naruto. I love you. I really do. I want you to be by my side. I want to wake up with you, take care of you, feed you, protect you. I'm being really sincere." His throat constricted. "You know it isn't easy for me to say these kinds of things, but I love you, Naruto." His voice was pleading. She lazily raised an eyebrow. "Feed me, protect me," she sneered as he straightened and walked a few steps to the side, trying to ward away the hurt he felt. She stood up and walked to face him. "This, from the man who wanted to kill me 8 years ago, from the man who put his hand through my lung, the man who nearly drove his sword through my chest." She placed one finger on his chest and pushed. Her upper lip curled. "This, from the man who can't even manage to hunt down and kill his brother to avenge his clan." She paused, and his fingers curled into trembling fists. "I think I'd rather not have your so-called protection, Uchiha Sasuke." She laughed and ambled into the kitchen, switching on the light and walking around his table, letting her fingers trail lightly on the wood and the chair she used to occupy when she came. Her fingers left her chair and touched the one he'd occupy when she'd come around, and then she leaned against the counter behind his chair with a nonchalant air. Sasuke squeezed his eyes shut and his nails bit into his palms. This was nothing like how he'd imagined it would go. What she had said had really cut deep. He took a deep breath and opened his eyes, and strode into the kitchen. "I'm sorry about what happened years ago," he said, placing his palms on the dining table and leaning down. "Let me make it up to you for the rest of your life. Let me love you, Naruto." He never thought he'd ever want someone to love him again. He never thought he'd ever open his heart to anyone ever again, much less this particular person. He'd never thought he'd love someone so much that he'd plead for them to allow him to love them. "I thought you had feelings for me, too," Sasuke thought as he took a deep breath to keep himself level-headed. She looked up at him, frowning deeply. "It's just so easy for you to dismiss what happened with a simple, sorry, isn't it, Sasuke?" He groaned in frustration. "What would you have me do, then? I'm not taking your forgiveness for granted, but I thought with all the effort you put into dragging me back all those years ago, you could maybe find it in your heart to forgive me when I finally, sincerely ask for it. What do I have to do so that you'll forgive me? Tell me, Naruto." She glanced at him and walked out of the kitchen. "It doesn't matter now," she said as she passed him. He resisted the urge to grab her and sit her down. Sasuke pounded on the table with a fist and followed her out. "Then what does?" he growled as he walked into his bedroom, where he found her sitting on his bed where she'd always sit when she stayed the night. "I tell you that I love you and you throw it back in my face. What's going on, Naruto? Please." He knelt on one knee and grabbed one of her hands and held it to his cheek. Please, tell me, Naruto. She stared at him coldly. Let go of my hand, Uchiha. He reluctantly let go and stood up. He felt as if a vice had closed around his heart and was squeezing slowly and painfully. He raised a hand over his forehead and bangs, pushing back his hair and clutching at it. Everything was going horribly. He had been sure that she had feelings for him too, otherwise she wouldn't have kissed him that night, right? Don't you get it, Uchiha? She said slowly. I've been playing you all along. You fell for it like the idiot everyone says I am. She laughed unpleasantly. I've gotten what I wanted, and made you fall in love with me at the same time. She said those 3 words as if they tickled her. Sasuke's black eyes flashed angrily even as he felt the vice around his heart tighten. I don't believe you. Uzumaki Naruto is not this cruel, and I cannot believe Namikaze Naruto would be any different. Naruto looked up at him with a pitying smile. She clucked her tongue and shook her head. That's what I keep telling you. Do you really know me, Uchiha? She said in a mock-patient tone. Uzumaki Naruto would never turn his back on his village. She lifted her bangs away from her Hittite. Let me tell you, I put this scratch in myself. She gestured with her thumb at the scored metal plate and let her hair cover the Hittite again, and unbuttoned the first 2 buttons of her cloak. This should tell you what I think of your feelings, Uchiha. The high collar fell sideways to expose her throat, and immediately Sasuke noticed the necklace he had given her was gone. Only the other necklace with the blue-green stone hung around her neck. He closed his eyes slowly. That's right, Uchiha. He looked at her with a pained expression, and she smirked at him. I got rid of that cheap piece of crap the moment I was out of Konoha. If you want it back you can go search the forest outside the gate. You just might find it if someone hasn't picked it up yet. The vice around his heart squeezed until he couldn't bear it. Naruto, he said softly, angrily. Shut up. She had the gall to chuckle. He glared at her, though he felt as if a hole had been punched through his chest. Was this how Naruto had felt when he hit her with his Chidori? The utter, crushing disappointment dropped into his stomach like a Doden jutsu. His eyes flashed angrily. I don't know what you're trying to do. If you want to hurt me, you've done it. If you want me to hate you, well, you're well on your way to accomplishing that. She didn't look fazed at all, she only smirked at him. He looked coldly at her. Well, she said, and got to her feet. As fun as this has been, I've got to go. That's right, you are the one doing the leaving now, aren't you? Sasuke muttered bitterly. I should never have let you back into my life. We all do things we regret, she told him airily. I'm sure you'll get over it soon enough. She leered at him. What? No goodbye kiss. I kissed you the last time. It's only fair that you kiss me now. He glared at her, trembling in anger. Don't push it, Naruto, he hissed in a low, dangerous tone. A myriad of emotions whirled in her suddenly expressive blue eyes, and without warning, she caught his face between her hands and kissed him sloppily but passionately on the lips. Caught by surprise, he froze to the spot and his eyes widened. Her tongue licked at his lips and sent a shiver through him that jolted him to his senses, and he slapped her and moved away from her with a disgusted look on his face. Get out of my house before I do something I'll regret, he snarled with his eyes narrowed. She licked her lips and ignored the reddening spot on her cheek where he'd slapped her. He repressed the flinch that was threatening to show at the sight of the handprint on her face. His handiwork. She brushed imaginary dirt from her cloak before smoothing down its folds. Her movements were slow, almost as if she were reluctant to leave. He watched her, feeling a strange urge to wrap his arms around her despite the anger that was burning in his veins. He wanted to bury his face in her neck and kiss the red splotch on her face despite the pain he felt in his chest. Pain she'd put there, he reminded himself. Goodbye, Uchiha Sasuke, she said, giving him an empty grin. She formed a few hand seals, and Sasuke had to stop himself from stopping her. With a last glance from those blue eyes he loved so much, she disappeared. Sasuke closed his eyes and groaned deep in his chest, clutching at his hair. He felt like crying and wailing, yet not one sob escaped his lips. A few hot tears dripped down his face, and he sank to the floor with his back resting against the bed. His heart hurt so bad that one hand clawed desperately at it, wanting to rip it out of his chest. His jaw lowered in a silent scream, no sound would come out. He had fallen so hard for her, and now it hurt so much. He rested his elbows on his knees and buried his face in palms. He stayed that way the whole night.